Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Organic Matters podcast brought to you by the Irish Organic Association. It's going to be an interesting podcast this week because we have Michael Gleeson, and as he's just been telling me, he's sort of turned his hand to everything at some stage. So there might be some pearls of wisdom there. If you're thinking of doing cheese or if you're thinking of going into organic poultry, there might be some information there. But at the minute, Michael, you are focusing on organic rosé veal. So tell us a bit about that product and maybe where did the idea come from?
Well, I suppose the idea kind of like a lot of things kind of came about almost by accident in a way. I suppose myself and my wife Nora took over the farm here in Ballyhar near Killarney in Kerry. God, I think it's like 12 years ago now or more. And it really was a blank canvas. There was no sort of standing enterprise on the farm. So I have a background in environmental science, and I've done a lot of work with farmers markets and consultancy work with food producers and various things in the past. So I was kind of looking around, thinking to myself, what could I do that would be quite unique? And I would have had always had an interest in rare breeds and native breeds. And had a very much a soft spot for things for Shorthorns and the Herefords and the traditional breeds like that. But I suppose being in Rome, I thought I'd look at what the Romans do, and I went down to visit Miss Hilliard in Killarney, who would be the secretary of the Kerry Cattle Society. And anyone that's ever been down in her place, it's kind of there on the banks of the lake.
She is a bastion of Kerry cattle. For anyone who doesn't know what they are a rare breed and kind of I would call them quite stocky, but I'm a Hereford breeder, so maybe I'm biased. But
we're all biased towards our own breed, unfortunately.
We are. This is true. So I take it that you purchased a couple of what would have been quite expensive Kerry cattle and came back with them, did you?
Well, I tell you what actually happened was that Miss Hilliard's job was just to cast a little spell on me down there by the lake with the Kerry cattle. And I was actually doing a piece of consultancy work with Goobeen Farm down in West Cork. And instead of the final payment for the piece of consultancy work, I came back with 3 Kerry cows in a cow box from West Cork. So those are my first 3 animals that I got on the farm here. And I suppose what happened really was they had 3 calves, there were 2 heifers and a bull, and the bull was kind of there on his own, looking a bit lonesome after about 6 months because you couldn't leave him with the heifers. And I decided I'd try. I contacted a local abattoir and I said we'd process him and see what we kind of had at the end of the process, because he was in fine fettle. He was a great looking animal from a point of view of a finished animal. So I suppose a part of the discussion, we realised what we had there was rare breed organic rosé veal. And I kind of said to myself, gosh, that sounds good anyway, so there must be a market for that somewhere. So I went about approaching a few of the higher end hotels. I mean, luckily in Killarney, we have something like, we're within a stone's throw of like 7 or 8 5-star hotels, and a lot of restaurants in the county as well because of the tourist trade. And
did you keep him as a whole, or did you castrate him, or what was the thinking?
No, he was whole actually, because what it was, I suppose, was that he was as long as you kind of catch them before about, I would regard maybe 10 or 11 months kind of the cutoff point. Technically, they're still rosé veal, or still veal if they're under 12 months of age. But what you find is, I don't know, is it a thing like boar taint, but the meat quality kind of changes once they start to become more bulls, I suppose, and start to develop testosterone and things like that. So
I get a bit of background for people. I mean, traditionally, I think nearly 200,000 calves are exported from Ireland every year, mainly bulls, and they're raised as veal, mainly in Holland and the Netherlands, but that's white veal, so they're kind of fed nothing but milk. So rosé veal is where the calves are that bit older and the meat gains that kind of pinkish quality, hence the rosé. Am I right? Am I right that far, Michael?
That'd be correct, because I suppose the term rosé veal kind of sprung up, I think, mainly in the UK because it was very much a differentiator for the 2 products, because obviously the slightly darker colour is a result of the animals having a much more, I suppose, natural upbringing. I suppose a lot of people's hang-ups around veal are based around the whole animal welfare issue and, you know, the idea of restricting diet and movement to the extent to which they do in traditional veal production. But my cattle are raised completely naturally, have access to whatever feed they want. They can get their hooves on, so to speak, and they're suckling from start, but they can eat grass or, you know, and that kind of thing as well. So it's a bit of a moniker that sort of it talks about that kind of points to the better animal welfare standard as much as anything else.
And I guess so you must have found your market with your high-end restaurants. So how many animals would you be sending to the abattoir on an annual basis now? And has
Well,
that been?
actually, I suppose to be honest about it, the trade, the outlets that I have kind of evolved over the years, because I suppose the first places that I would have sold to would have been a lot of high-end restaurants. But the problem, I suppose, with that was that, you know, one time you could, you know, a restaurant could be looking for ossobuco, which would be the shin meat. And the next time they could be looking for brisket, or they could be looking for cheek, or something very specific and very detailed. And the problem that kind of arose fairly quickly for me was that it was quite difficult to sell the entire carcass. You know, that you could wind up. I mean, kind of strangely, you could find yourself with a lot of rib meat that there just didn't seem to be a demand for at the moment with the restaurants. I mean, it's a lot of it was whatever was kind of hip or topical at the moment. So what I started to do then was I started to do 5 kilo freezer boxes directly from the freezer, and it's my Cahalans butchers in Killorglin that are processing veal for me now. So basically, the animal goes is processed and it's cut up and packaged and brought back, and I have it all batched down, and it goes into the freezer, and I'm able to put together the freezer boxes that way, and that allows me then to give a kind of a mix of meat. So if you order a freezer box, you'll always get a fairly similar mix, but you'll get some mince, some dice, some roasting meat. You'll get and if you have a few special requests, I'm willing to do a few bits and pieces like that. So it's sort of evolved that way. And I suppose what I've got now, I suppose, to answer your question, is about process an animal about once every month, or maybe once every 6 weeks. Now, and I'm also selling quite a bit of my meat to a butcher in Ranelagh called the Village Butcher. And I suppose the reason that is working quite well for me is that the Village Butcher, they do online sales, and they also sell from their beautiful butcher shop in on the street in Ranelagh. But they have a very high-end sort of customer base, and a big market, obviously, being in Dublin. And when you're involved with a very niche product like rare breed organic Kerry rosé veal, it's important that you have access to a kind of a bigger market outlet, so that you have, I suppose, a lot of options, you know.
And people are going to be wondering the finances of it as well, because I guess a lot of people with pedigree cattle would keep them as pedigrees. So maybe I'm assuming that it's the bulls mainly you send, not the heifers. And then the finances of it, do you know how much per kilo you're getting?
Well, it depends. It depends really. Like for the 5 kilo freezer box, I would charge €75, and obviously, if a butcher or a restaurant is looking for a specific cut of meat, I have my price range based on the different cuts. You know, obviously, you'll sell a fillet for a hell of a lot more than you will some mince, so to speak. But I suppose what it does, I suppose, you see, I suppose a lot of traditional breeds, you know, they're not flavour of the month if you go to the local mart. But I'm able to take a Kerry bull at 8 months of age and turn it into a reasonable amount of money, whereas you wouldn't really have market for them in the local marts. And you know, if I'm selling something like most of the female cattle that I breed now, because I have about 25 Kerry's breeding, and most of the females would go to other breeders, obviously, and I'd keep a handful for myself. as replacements. So it's quite niche, but I mean, I'm also running the Kerry Cattle Society's Facebook page, and that's actually a handy place as well for breeders to, if they're looking for something, they can go up and say, look, I'm looking for a breeding bull. Anybody got anything suitable for me? And you can also put your animals up there for sale as well. And Dundee is a good one as well, because anyone looking for cattle, specialist cattle online, stick the name in on Dundee.
Are you attempting to weave a spell of your own over a couple of listeners and hoping to attract a few more Kerry breeders? I'd say you will. They're lovely cattle, actually.
They're beautiful cattle, and they really are characters. I mean, some people think they're flighty, but I just find that they just don't suffer fools. And if you go into the field and you're in bad form, they'll stay away from you. Whereas if you're in good form, they'll come over for a scratch. They're very sensitive animals, I find, more than other cattle that I've ever had. Yeah, and I suppose what I would be keen is that, I know organic farmers are all, all by definition have an environmental conscience and would be keen on supporting and promoting heritage. And I would always say that, rare breeds, for example, we need more people to keep rare breeds in order for the genetic pool to be expanded and to make the whole thing viable. And I would kind of appeal to other farmers there, one or two of them in your herd isn't going to put you out a huge amount. And I think for the sake of all decency, I think more people should keep one or two rare breeds just to kind of help the cause and help the survival of the animal. And that kind of thing around agricultural biodiversity, I think is increasingly important. And we're in a dangerous situation where if we narrow the breeding pool too much, we'll find ourselves with very limited options and a kind of a bit of a genetic bottleneck, and that can happen in the conventional main breeds as well, I suppose. So the more variety we have in the herd, I think, the better off we are.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Then people might be wondering about some technicalities. We might have some beef finishers listening. So what weight would you be hoping to get your young bull up to before he's sent to the abattoir, and then how much carcass weight are you expecting back?
Well, I suppose given that they're not the biggest animals in the world, and I don't weigh them before they go. I'll be honest about it, but you do kind of judge them, I suppose, around their form, and because you may have an animal that might be, by the date, might be the right one to send, but there might be one that is just in better condition than them. So I kind of judge the body condition and just sort of, I suppose, when you've gone through the process often enough, you kind of develop a little bit of an eye for it. But the last one I sent now to Cahalans, he killed out, the carcass weight was about 120 kilos. And I suppose I'd be hoping to get maybe about 85, 90 kilos of usable veal from that carcass.
And are you giving him a bit of meal before he goes off, or a couple of kg of meal, or does it depend on whether it's winter or summertime?
Yeah, well, I would give them a little bit, and if I was in the depths of winter, and but I what I've tended to do is they're left suckling they're on their mothers to the day they go up the loading door. I mean, that sounds a bit cruel maybe, but at the point that they've gotten to, I suppose, if you've got an 8-month-old bull calf, he's nearly as big as his mother, and the mother's kind of done with him at that stage anyway.
I've been in a similar predicament where I'd have a cow that I decided I wasn't keeping maybe for the following year, and we did exactly that. And you are right, it's nearly hilarious to see this bull calf, and it is the size of its mother, but they have a great life, and I think that's an important point for animal welfare. They really do. They have a fantastic life.
And I suppose it's very important to me as well that the guys in Cahalans are very good around the animal welfare side of things, and they've designed all their system around Temple Grandin's kind of systems around animal welfare, and that's very important to me as well. That that they're being treated right all the way through the process, and Cahalans do that for me. But I suppose they're suckling a dairy cow, and remember, a Kerry is a dairy cow, so they're well able to feed a calf. I have reasonably good clovery ground, and the grass is good quality as well. And even when they're in to shed in the winter, I'd have a good bit of red clover silage in the mix there as well, which, you know, I was actually listening to your last podcast there about red clover silage with Mary, and you know, while you don't really need to drive them on that much, but you know, a Kerry suckling eating red clover, he's gonna finish pretty good for you. And I mean, I might give a handful of stuff in the winter time, maybe occasionally if I think they need it, but generally speaking, they don't.
Yeah, no, and yeah, that's a good point, especially if the you know if cows have suckling calves under them, it's no harm if you can get that free protein from the clover into them. It's great, you know, and
Yeah.
it's I don't know about you, but I like my cows to be in good condition as well. I know people could say they could be fat, but I think it's important to mind them because they mind us.
Yeah, well, the one thing you do have to watch with Kerrys is that, as they say here in Kerry, they're very kind animals, and they, you know, they'll nearly feed and milk so much that they'll nearly lose condition themselves, but they won't stop feeding their progeny. You know, it's kind of a thing you do have to watch a little bit with them because they're quite fine boned, and you know, they are a dairy animal at the end of the day. So you know, you don't, you know, they're never going to end up looking. I mean, you have a lot of variety within the breed itself. Some of them look more beefy than others, and some of them obviously are better milkers than others, and more fine bone. But yeah, you have to judge it, and if your cow looks like she's starting to give a little bit too much away, you have to mind her too, you know.
Yeah. And Michael, if people want to find or order a beef box for themselves, where can they go?
Well, ballyhard.com is the website that I'm under. It's in, as we said earlier, it's in dire need of an update, but they can find my contact details there or send me a web message, and I'll get back to them. Generally speaking, I only do the freezer boxes within a reasonable distance of where I am here in Kerry. But anyone up around, I know the village butcher do the rosé veal and do mail order nationwide. So if you're very keen to get some veal, you can contact the village, go onto the village butcher's website, and they'll be able to hook you up, as the saying goes.
Excellent. Well, Michael, thank you very much. That was fascinating. And for anyone listening, obviously there will be a podcast as well next week. But you've been listening to Organic Matters, brought to you by the Irish Organic Association. And for more information on organics, visit www.irishorganicassociation.ie.